This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, welcome to a new segment of Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenewald, a Senior Fellow for the Susquehanna Valley Center, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mara Donnelly. Mara, welcome.
Hello, Charlie.
Why, certainly in this particular season, we have seen lots of activity on the part of the federal government in terms of regulation and regulatory activities, and a lot which affects the economy of Pennsylvania and other states around the country.
Well, it's true, and it's not all good.
Well, we have someone here who's joining us at the studio, one of our board members at Susquehanna Valley Center and the executive director of the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association, Dave Taylor. Welcome back to the show, Dave.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Thank you, Mark. Great to be with you.
So nice to have you join us again. If there's anyone who can talk about regulation and how it affects industry, and particularly manufacturing in Pennsylvania, it's you. And we've seen a lot of activity recently by the Environmental Protection Agency. Now, the EPA didn't exist until President Nixon created it after his election in 1968. And we find that the EPA was lauded by both sides, that this was going to be a great benefit to the country. But recently, they have taken their powers and run perhaps amok.
Yeah, the law of unintended consequences is in full effect. And when you look back to the era when these sorts of bureaucracies were founded, the federal regulatory agencies, there are a lot of unforeseen consequences that have played themselves out. That because Congress delegated powers to these federal regulatory agencies to write the rules implementing the broader laws that were passed by Congress, basically Congress has given away some of its authority. And as we're discovering, once you give it away, it's not very easy to reclaim it. And as a result, what you see now in the latter days of the Obama administration is the president attempting to enact through regulations what he was not able to legitimately get through acts of Congress.
But Congress, if it wanted to initially, could write actually the regulations they want to see into the law and make it the law. I know that we did that a lot in the Pennsylvania legislature because we didn't trust, in many instances, the Pennsylvania bureaucracy.
Well, these are lessons that have only been learned over time, and especially in the age of Obama, the federal agencies have become ever more brazen, and that there are a series of things that are being promulgated. And I could go off on the particulars of each one and why it's bad for business and why it's not right. And I'm glad to go down in those weeds a little ways if you want. But I think that for the viewers, the larger issue is that you see the federal government again, attempting to bypass the will of the people through their elected representatives by issuing rules regarding things that are well beyond the scope of the authority that Congress delegated to them. And I guess it's necessary to go into the particulars. First of all, that the EPA is attempting to expand upon its powers regarding navigable waterways. Now, because we speak the English language as our native tongue, navigable waterways, you would believe, would be waterways that are navigable. We're talking about rivers. Yeah. We're talking about like the Chesapeake Bay. We're talking about large bodies of water that are navigable. The Environmental Protection Agency is seeking to expand its powers so that under that law that it can regulate essentially any standing body of water.
And that would include ponds, ditches, and stormwater runoff.
Correct.
That's
correct.
Crazy.
It's absolute.
That's not navigable.
It's absolute madness. And when
navigable by what? A kayak?
I don't know. Maybe by like a little toy boat or something. But you say it out loud like that, and the viewers will think that, well, obviously they're kidding. That couldn't be real. No, in fact, this is very real, and that degree of overreach is what the nation is experiencing or is about to experience as President Obama is attempting to impose his agenda during his remaining months in office.
Well, now the House has passed some legislation to stop this, and we can get to that.
Yes.
But Dave, the EPA would say that these regulations are 40 years old, that they need to be updated, that they don't represent some of the issues that we're experiencing in the nation now. What would you say to that?
I said those are great issues to be decided by Congress.
Hogwash? Would you say that's hogwash?
Well, I mean, it's an excuse. Obviously, on the part of the regulators, it's an excuse for their power grab, but it's a fig leaf. If these are real issues and real concerns, the way that we go about it is through Congress, authorization by Congress. I mean, and with one of the other areas where the EPA is attempting to seize power is with the solid waste disposal rules. And this is a rule that went into effect in 2008 after many years of work, review, negotiation with stakeholders to put the rule in place. Well,
and what does that rule say?
Well, I mean, again, it's the rules regarding the disposal of waste solids and what goes into a landfill, what goes into recycling.
Okay.
And again, this is in the regulatory scheme. That is a new rule. That is a new rule that just went into effect in the very recent past after many years of work, and for it to be revisited so soon, and especially without any kind of authorization by Congress or any proof that there's a need to revisit that so recently, it's just another excuse by the regulators to turn the screws on the rest of the economy.
Okay, well, we have, as I mentioned, there is some legislation pending in the House, or that has actually passed the House, that will curb the power of the EPA on the particular issue of the navigable waterways.
Right.
Have you heard anything more about what might happen on the federal level? Is it going to go to the Senate?
Well, obviously, we live in an era of divided government, and that the Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid of Nevada, has quite stunningly
politically divided.
Politically divided. Well, of course, the institutions, checks and balances,
right.
You know, all of those things. But the politically divided government has led to an era of, I guess, ever more audacious refusal by people in power to respect the Constitution and the rules in place, and also, I think, the sort of the unwritten but still very real responsibility to effectively govern. That Senator Reid, as majority leader, has attempted to insulate his members from controversial votes and to basically act as just do blocking for the administration, that it has refused to take up these issues and put them to a vote, because in the light of day, those U.S. senators, if they were presented with these votes, would have no choice but to make themselves accountable to the public. And again, the case against each one of these areas of regulatory overreach, it's vivid, but we don't have that debate in the public square the way we are supposed to, because of the deliberate mismanagement of the upper chamber by the majority leader, Mr. Reid.
But when we look across the spectrum of all the federal departments and agencies, Dave, do you think that this regulatory overreach is being coordinated and promoted?
Oh, absolutely.
From the White House?
Yep.
Or are all these rules and regulations all the brainchilds of the people in the departments?
Well, I think it's both. I think it's both. I think that it is the inherent nature of those bureaucracies and the people who staff them to increase their own authority. Power tends to attract more power unto itself. That's just the nature of things. But also, I think there's no question that this president and his most senior aides have empowered, if not actually encouraged, these agencies to seek these kinds of expanded powers, because I think that's, again, that's the point of the exercise, to impose these shackles on our economy and on our society to the greatest possible extent. The other major issue that's moving is regarding emission standards and particulate matter. And during the first 2 years of the president's administration, when he had a supermajority in the U.S. Senate and controlled the U.S. House, they could have done anything that they wanted. And a cap and trade system of emissions control was one of the issues at play, and the president could not get that through Congress at that time, even with those supermajorities. So now, essentially, the administration is attempting to, to move the goalposts once again, but to do it through a regulatory process that bypasses Congress. This is extra-constitutional in nature. And again, as I said at the outset, rather than dwelling on any particular one of these things, I think what's the most alarming factor is the way that these things are happening together and the degree of power that's being claimed by unaccountable agencies to control our economy and to control our lives.
Well, in an attempt, Dave, to be fair and balanced, which I heard that somewhere, there is some good news. Department of Energy recently had a study.
Yes.
It's actually good
well,
news.
And this is, and again, the having remembering the early days, as you mentioned, Charlie, about when the EPA came into existence with President Nixon. As a little kid in the 70s, I remember every car belching black smoke in the exhaust. And I remember, people just chucking trash out the windows and the roadsides were littered. I mean, it was a very different world. And the safeguards that have been put in place, the societal focus on maintaining public safety and public health and properly managing our natural resources, all those things are necessary and good. Unfortunately, the environmental impulse has become, I think, almost religious and non-rational in its way, because what you have, you're chasing the last molecule of pollution. You're getting to background levels, and essentially in that way you're fighting Mother Nature itself. And we've seen this dynamic here in Pennsylvania when it comes to the irrational fears that have been whipped up about hydraulic fracking, which is the revolutionary method of retrieval of the deep pockets of natural gas and oil that are now fueling America's economy, and particularly here in Pennsylvania. That there was a situation in Dimmock up in northeastern Pennsylvania where water wells were polluted with methane, and that, as per the propagandist Josh Fox in his movie Gasland, that this was attributed to hydraulic fracturing. Well, the U.S. Department of Energy conducted a lengthy landmark standard that proved that these naturally migrating pockets of surface methane that got into people's water wells had nothing to do, absolutely nothing to do, with the energy industry and the hydraulic fracturing that's taking place, multiple Empire State Buildings below ground. So does this change the mentality? Does this win the argument? I don't know. I mean, you have, in New York State, you've got a moratorium on fracking, that you have entertainment industry moguls like Yoko Ono and Susan Sarandon and Mark Ruffalo, who are part of this totally irrational propaganda campaign against energy jobs for rural New Yorkers. And so, at the same time that here in Pennsylvania we say, well, thank you, we would prefer to have all of the investment and the jobs. It's pitiable that that folks in New York State, in the rural areas that could really use, economic vitality, that they won't have the chance to be part of that energy boom because of utterly irrational and unscientific judgments on the part of prominent people.
Has the EPA been involved in New York at all in that situation?
Well, let me see. I mean, Lisa Jackson, the former administrator of the EPA under President Obama, who was certainly no friend to business, that in testifying before Congress, that she had to say, no, there has never been an instance where a pollution of the water table has been attributed to hydraulic fracturing, and that's in decades of fracking being deployed as a means of retrieving deep energy.
Okay, we're out of time, Dave, but we want to have you come back and talk about the coal industry and what regulatory overreach may be doing to the coal industry and the availability of energy in Pennsylvania.
That'll be my great pleasure. Thank you.
We'd love to have you back for that, but we'll come back with a second segment of Behind the Headlines right after this. Stay tuned.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Business Council, envisioning a commonwealth in which residents enjoy a very high quality of life in sustainable communities. The council works aggressively to define key long-term policy strategies and solutions to make the commonwealth more competitive, creating and sustaining a better Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by Daily Express, transporting construction, farm, and industrial equipment throughout the United States, and by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by Penn Waste, your best local choice for your waste removal and recycling needs.
Welcome back to the second segment of Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenewald, and Maura and I on this segment are going to be talking a little bit more about Pennsylvania's economy and energy and the role that energy plays in our economic development. And to do this, we have with us Terry Bossert, who is the Vice President of Legislative and Regulatory Affairs for Range Resources. Welcome to the show, Terry.
Thank you.
It's so nice to have you. We've just been talking about regulatory overreach, and we were talking about the role of energy in our economy here in Pennsylvania. We find that you're part of a big conference that's coming up at Penn State, being held by the Penn State Marcellus Center. Would you tell us a little bit about this this conference that's coming up and what you're going to be covering?
Sure. The conference is being held in Canonsburg, which is in Washington County, PA, not too far from the city of Washington, PA.
One of the hearts of Marcellus Shale.
Right, one of the hearts of the Marcellus Shale development. It's on October 14th and 15th. Among the sponsors are ANGA, America's Natural Gas Alliance, of which Range Resources is a member, along with most of the major independent oil and gas production companies.
What's the aim of the conference?
And the aim of the conference is really to focus on all of the opportunities to use this resource that we're blessed with here in Pennsylvania, all of this natural gas. And I think it's going to be in it a lot of, it's going to talk about infrastructure, it's going to talk about uses as transportation fuel, as power generation fuel, and as a manufacturing fuel. And I think the whole point of it is that the long-term economic benefit of the Marcellus Shale and the underlying Utica Shale is those uses in Pennsylvania, manufacturing, et cetera. The long-term economic driver is not going to be us drilling wells. It's going to be people using the gas that we develop by drilling those wells.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about natural gas, but I actually want to know a little bit more about you.
Okay.
As the Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Director at Range Resources, two questions. One, give us a little bit about your background, and secondly, what's your biggest challenge on a daily basis in your capacity at Range Resources?
Okay. Well, my background is I basically spent most of my career as an environmental lawyer, sometimes working in the government, sometimes working in private practice. I worked for DER when it was still DER before it became DEP. I actually helped form
that goes back pretty far, but
yes.
Let's not date you.
Well, it does. I actually helped form the Environmental Crimes Unit in the Attorney General's office, in between back and forth to private practice. And then I was the DEP Chief Counsel when Governor Ridge was the governor, and then went back into private practice, and about 5 years ago decided that the oil and gas boom in Pennsylvania was the place to be. Interestingly, I would say my biggest challenge on a day-to-day basis is bringing perspective to what this oil and gas boom means. Some people are very excited about it, and some people,
terrified.
somewhat to my surprise, are very upset about it. And I think sometimes the media will portray things as overly negative if they're related to the Marcellus Shale development. We say if there's a truck accident and it involved a truck that's involved in our industry, it's a week-long story, and if it involves, you know, your local fuel oil delivery truck, then it's if it's a story at all, it's a one-day story. So that's part of the perspective I think I have to deal with all the time.
Well, I've noticed that part of the conference that's going on this week is focused on liquefied natural gas. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and how it could be used?
Okay. Well, liquefying natural gas is really done, well, for two reasons, but the primary reason is to make it transportable by something other than a pipeline. Until very recently, we were looking in this country at terminals to import liquefied natural gas from the Middle East. It's basically liquefied, kept in these big containers, and comes on ships.
Moved about.
It can also be used as a transportation fuel. Most people talk about compressed natural gas or CNG more as a transportation fuel, but actually there's people who say that LNG is usable in that way too. But the opportunity here, frankly, is to reverse some of those terminals, like the one that was planned at Cove Point in Maryland, instead of being an import terminal, to be an export terminal. So the gas can be liquefied and it can be transported overseas to some countries who may find it friendlier to buy their gas from the United States than some other options they might have.
Well, liquefying gas, are we actually doing that here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania at present?
We are not doing it in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania at present, but there are plans to do that in Philadelphia, in the area of the closed refineries, the oil refineries that have closed down there. There are plans to both have liquefied natural gas capabilities and also to have capabilities to deal with what are called natural gas liquids. We're very lucky in Pennsylvania because we really have two kinds of gas. In the northern tier, we have the so-called dry gas, and some people, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, refer to it as Gucci gas because it's almost pure methane when it comes out of the ground. There's very little to do with it, and it's ideal for liquefying and shipping overseas. In the southwest corner of the state, we have a lot of so-called wet gas, and it has other products mixed in with it, ethane, propane, butane. All of those things can be split out of the gas stream and then used for various manufacturing, plastics and other manufacturing, and that's why you hear people talk about a so-called cracker and the shell cracker that they've been talking about in western Pennsylvania, to split those anes into manufacturing raw materials.
Can I just clarify one thing? We may not be liquefying it here, but it is our gas.
It's our gas.
It's our gas.
Right.
So it is coming out of our efforts with Marcellus Shale and everything.
Is.
Okay.
That's correct.
I just wanted to make sure we understood that. It sounds like this has pretty significant global implications, not just for Pennsylvania, but for the United States.
It definitely does, yes. I mean, definitely.
Well, what we're not saying here is that Western Europe has made itself dependent upon Russian gas, and therefore they are more subject to being blackmailed by Vladimir Putin.
Right.
And if they would buy gas from us, that blackmail situation would be removed, and it would be, of course, we would start to be an exporter of energy, which we haven't been in that position for many years, I guess. Is that fair to say?
That's very true. I was just reading something about that the other day. I think it was somewhere in the 1960s that Pennsylvania, the United States, became an importer of gas and oil as opposed to an exporter. So certainly it gives us security in terms of, and some independence. It gives an opportunity to deal with Western Europe, as you indicated. And there are, and not only Europe, we get constant inquiries from Japan about the supply of Pennsylvania gas and how much gas Pennsylvania is going to produce, and will it be available for export to Asia as well.
So what types of individuals or companies will be attending your conference? Who's going to be most interested in going, and what can they expect from the conference?
Well, I'm hoping that some of the companies that will be attending, and there will be presentations by some companies who have already done this, are companies that have large fleets of vehicles that could be converted to natural gas fueling on an equivalent basis, gallon equivalent basis. Natural gas is about $1.50 to $1.70 a gallon as compared to the price of gasoline. Right now, because there aren't a lot of there's about 30 public fueling stations throughout Pennsylvania. But it really works better for a fleet of vehicles that can come back every evening to the garage and refuel. So companies like Waste Management and UPS have already been converting their fleets.
So they would house the natural gas on site,
right?
Instead of having to go to a distribution place.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there have been studies that have shown reductions in emissions within a neighborhood to drop as much as 80% if your local delivery trucks are running on natural gas as opposed to running on diesel fuel. So those are some of the folks we hope other companies will come. Likewise, manufacturing companies. There are several companies in Pennsylvania who found themselves sort of perched on top of the Marcellus Shale and have discovered they have a very inexpensive fuel source, and some of their facilities have actually expanded. Some that were on the chopping block to go away because they're in the so-called Rust Belt have actually survived and expanded because of the cheap energy.
Hired more people?
Hired more people.
More jobs is good.
Yeah.
Terry, how many people are employed in Pennsylvania by the Marcellus companies?
Yeah, that's always an issue, and I'm never sure I know exactly the answer. By the Marcellus companies, directly, it's probably in the 2,000 to 3,000 range. But in terms of the companies that provide our services, like actually provide the drill rigs, etc., we're looking at 25,000 employees.
Okay. All right. We need to have you come back to talk a little bit more.
All right.
We've just begun to scratch the surface here. We always run out of time, don't we, Maura?
Yeah.
Happy to do so.
Well, we're happy to have you. We'll be with you again next week on a new edition of Behind the Headlines. Be sure to tune in then. We'll see you.